welcome to the next video. So this one is on Christmas Day in December 2018, and well, everybody in the finance world is kind of freaking out a little bit right now and talking a lot about what asset allocations are the best and is this whole financial independence thing really going to work. And I figured it was a great time to address that and talk about what our asset allocation is and why. And after putting lots and lots of thought into it, because we're working hard to earn all that money and I want it to do as much as it can for us, I consider myself firmly in the camp of 100% equities. And I want this video to be talking a little bit about how I arrived there, which was pretty much just from looking at data. And before I go any further, I should probably say that in all of these videos, the whole point is just for me to talk about what we're doing and what seems to be working for us or what things we're struggling with. It's just kind of sharing our experiences, sort of like a diary, just so other people have some data to work with. So you are absolutely welcome to make whatever choices you want with the money that's yours. I know it's a very personal subject for some people. But yeah, all these videos, it's not me trying to tell the rest of the world how to live. It's just sharing what's kind of worked for us, because I think some other people might look at what we're doing and think that it makes sense too. Okay, let me get to the actual meat of it. So, what it all comes down to is if you're aiming for financial independence, then at least when you're in the accumulation phase, you shouldn't be touching the money for at least 20 or so years. And the data seems to point to the fact that equities will outperform bonds in a 20-year period pretty much with complete success. And I'm guessing most of the people watching this video are already on the train with that, where they think a 100% bonds portfolio is a really bad idea. Most of the people that I talk with in the FI community are somewhere between 60% equities to 100% equities. So I'm not even going to make any arguments for why most of your portfolio should be equities. I think most people in the FI community are kind of already there for why that makes sense. What I want to talk about is how, in my opinion, in phase 1 when you're accumulating and phase 2 when you're coasting or when you're semi-retired, where you're still earning money to pay expenses, but yeah, you haven't completely pulled the plug. I think in both of those cases, bonds make absolutely no sense in your portfolio. And possibly even in phase 3, once you've actually pulled the trigger and aren't working anymore, even then, I think for most people, if you plan on being alive for more than 20 years after you retire, I don't think bonds make any sense. I don't think they actually help. I think they just give the illusion of security. And I'm going to try to give you some data for that to show you sort of how I arrived at that conclusion. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that I've been reading over the last week or two with stocks just kind of in a big downturn is I've been reading a lot of people. Well, first of all, there's people talking about market timing, which I think most of us are kind of in agreement that that's really hard to do, and when you're playing the long game, it's just completely unnecessary. But something I've been reading a lot is people saying, man, I am so glad some of my portfolio was in bonds so I could buy this dip. I'm doing much better than all those fools who were all stocks. Look at these bonds rescuing me. And I want to make an argument for how I think when you lay it out on paper, the bonds don't actually rescue you as much as a lot of people might think emotionally that they do. So let me pose a little question. Imagine that in October of 2018, which was a few months ago, and today is Christmas, so we've had a 20% downturn. If in October a genie presented you with 2 portfolios that you could have, and he said, listen, I'm either going to offer you $1 million, but you must invest it 90% equities, 10% bonds, or I can give you $1,025,000, but you have to be an asset allocation that's all stocks. Which one would be better? Even if you knew that a 20% downturn was coming right after the genie gave this to you, like if the genie could also give you look 3 months into the future, so, or 2 months, I guess. So
mathematically, it's kind of interesting. So scenario A, you would have $1 million, which is 900,000 in stocks, 100,000 in bonds, for the total of $1 million. And then after the 20% downturn, you would now have 720,000 in stocks and 100,000 in bonds. So your portfolio is now down to $820,000. Now here's what's crazy is if you just had 25,000 more stock in the first place, yeah, you would take a little bit more losses, but not very much. And in fact, having just 2.5% more money from the beginning offers the exact same protection that bonds would if 10% of your portfolio was bonds. Even if you had a crystal ball and knew that a 20% downturn was coming immediately after you bought those bonds, which most of the time that's not the case. Most of the time you buy bonds several years before the downturn actually happens. But even in the best case scenario where you bought the bonds right before the downturn happened, they still don't actually rescue you as much as you think. Only making 10 or 20% of your portfolio in bonds is just not going to actually salvage an awful lot of your portfolio, even when the downturn does happen. And generally, I mean, like mathematically, and I encourage you to crunch these numbers for yourself, if you were 100% equities back in 2016, you would continue to be ahead even today of someone who was running a 90-10 portfolio, because you would have, the gains that you would have made would have been more than the losses that eventually came. So yeah, I think that's most of my thought process on why the same logic that got me to want to have at least 80% of my portfolio in stocks, it turns out that same logic kind of pushed me all the way to the 100% mark. Even in a 50% downturn, all you would need is to just have like a small chunk more money. Like 10% bonds would only save you 5% of your portfolio in the best circumstances in a 50% downturn, even if you bought them with absolute perfect timing, which you probably will not. So I guess what I kind of want to end here is I hear a lot of people offering objections for what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. But most of the time, they just begin with the words, what if? And then they make up some crazy story like, well, what if exactly 3 days after you retire, stocks take a 50% decline or blah, blah, blah. But if there aren't any numbers, if you don't actually have any data for how likely those scenarios are to happen or what the outcome would look like if they happened, I feel like those arguments should be dismissed, or at most you should crunch the numbers for yourself and see if they have any actual mathematical truth to the claim. I just hear a lot of emotional stuff about, I'm so glad that I had bonds for this dip. And it's like, most people, if they've been running a 90-10 or an 80-20 portfolio for the last 10 or 20 or 5 or whatever years, for anything more than about 5 years, I just don't think bonds have much of a place. If you don't need the money for 5, 10, 20 years, equities just seems like the way to go. And for us, if your holding period is pretty much forever, because that's the goal of financial independence, is to never sell everything, I don't think bonds offer much protection at all. By the way, there's an article that offers a little bit of other number crunching in support of 100% equities, so I'm going to go ahead and link to that in the video description. But yeah, I'd love to hear if you have any arguments for where you think my ideas are flawed data-wise. If you want to do some number crunching and share it with me, like, I'm always open to new ideas because I want to do this better. If there's a way I can put my money to work better, that's always worth doing, right? All right, thanks for watching.
So I had one last closing thought that didn't really come to me until I was done filming. And I noticed kind of an overlap between investing and some of the side hustles that I do. So my main thing right now is delivery driving. And most of the money comes from tips, and it just depends on how much business you get on a given day. Sometimes there's tons of deliveries, and sometimes there aren't that many. And what I've learned doing a lot of delivery driving for like the last 6 months or so is you can't really worry too much about a single day's earnings, because no matter what kind of job you have like that, there's always going to be some days where you earn a lot and some days where you don't earn that much. There's like volatility is part of the job, right? But what I've also kind of learned is most of the jobs where the pay isn't guaranteed, where the income is unsteady, tend to, on the average, pay a little bit more for that uncertainty. It's like we live in a world that really rewards you if you can just ignore the volatility. And of course, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you really need that money to pay a bill in 2 days, then it might be kind of a stressful job. But what I've learned is I just kind of try to see the big picture, and I only look at I really only assess if my earnings are good enough. Like maybe I'll look at the monthly average for how much I'm earning. If I have like 6 bad days in a row doing DoorDash deliveries or something, then okay, that might be statistically significant. Maybe it's time to find some kind of different job. Maybe it's not paying that great. But 1 or 2 good or bad days, it's like, who cares? I've actually learned to kind of, when I drive for Jimmy John's and the person signs the ticket to leave me a tip, I don't even look at the ticket anymore. Just psychologically, it's easier to just not look at the individual transactions, but to try to focus on the big picture. While when I'm driving, I just try to do as many deliveries as I can, and maybe I'll reassess once every 3 months. Hey, am I earning enough at this job to continue doing it? So anyway, I just kind of saw a parallel between having an unsteady income and investments that get unsteady returns. And generally, if you can take a bigger picture and be patient and wait for those returns, you'll usually get rewarded with higher returns. So, yeah, thanks.